The fire service is a lifestyle. Some of us grew up knowing that this is what we would do. Others found it later in life. We all have a story to tell. We live a career of experience and knowledge. But what happens when we retire? All that knowledge and experience walks out the door. Welcome to Capture the Knowledge.
Dale Turner, retired assistant chief from Metro Fire.
It's been a long time. Nobody calls me that anymore. Oh boy, that's a long time ago. My brother was a volunteer firefighter, a little community called Bennett Valley. It's now part of the Sonoma County Fire District, and he encouraged me in 1976 to join, and I joined and I loved it. Fell in love with it. Stayed a volunteer for quite some time, about 8 years there. Did a couple summer seasons with them. In between that, I briefly worked for the city of Santa Rosa as what they have a sleeper program or a resident program. That got canceled after Proposition 13 came along. So I wandered around, did a little traveling, came back and did 2 seasons as a hot shot on Bear Divide in Southern California. Probably the best firefighting experience, the most knowledge learned on wildland was being a hotshot. It was pretty amazing opportunity. And then came back to Northern California, and my brother was going to college, and he said, I'm going to go to Sac State, why don't you come live with me? And we ended up at the American River Fire District back then. Arden and Arcade had just, Arden and Arcade had just merged, and they were working on a merger with Carmichael. I have no idea if that's right. You can cut that. And we became volunteers back in 1984 and loved it ever since. As a volunteer, I then got an opportunity to promote to firefighter, took the exam, and went ahead and promoted. My brother, who is my inspiration, he lives down in Texas, went to go finish his master's down in Texas and stayed in Austin. And he is still a volunteer paramedic for a small ambulance company in rural parts of Texas. So he still does this as a volunteer today, which is pretty cool. I'm retired now. Retired at the end of 2011, so this will be coming up on 10 years, which seems absolutely amazing. I probably know very few people at a firehouse that I was to walk into at this point. I spent a lot of time. I had a great fire chief who I admired tremendously to this day, and he said, when you retire, try your best not to work and find volunteer opportunities. We're still getting a pension, which in my opinion, we're still getting paid, so why not go out and take some of our life experiences that we have and share them with the community? So I'm involved in a couple of nonprofits, continue to do that work as board level and as a volunteer. Feel that's very important, and I get to spend a lot of time as a brand new grandfather. That's the best part of life right now, no doubt about it. So being a grandparent's great. We had a lot of fun. Today's world, that would be very inappropriate fun most of the time. Very male dominated, very white department, but a very close-knit department. And I just didn't know a whole lot more than what I saw there. 9 stations, great department, very close. Spent a lot of time as a family, spending a lot of time going to Oroville on Pat Cook's houseboat. You know, you go camping with folks over in the coast, whatever it's going to be. We did a lot more with the group, and you'd have 30 and 40 people. We'd go out to Finley's place out on the river, who's a CHP officer, and we'd have a giant party out there every year. So I think we did more of that type of stuff as 40 or 50 or 60 people than necessarily we do. Even as I retired, it was a lot less. You had your close folks, but you didn't have those huge groups that you do now, or that we did back then. Often the spouses were, sometimes they weren't. Finley's, they were definitely involved. The houseboat trips were usually just firefighters, men.
Okay, watch out.
Yep.
Just the guys.
Yep. The old guys were still wearing, the really old guys that were grumpy and wouldn't do it, wouldn't wear full turnouts. There were still a few pair of pull-ups. And the SCBA was for getting out of the structure, not going into the structure. and SCBAs weren't necessarily a common thing. Just as I was starting at American River, it started to be mandatory. Bob Chase was our director at the time for the reserves when I first started there, and he was very insistent upon it, and it was a big change. There was some differences of personalities between Carmichael, Arcade, and Arden fire districts, and those eventually became merged, but it took some time. And so we always joked, I'm sure that some people have heard, that Carmongoloids had 6 toes, very common. So it was just an interesting group that we as new people were trying to navigate that, and some of the guys stayed in their areas, and so when you went to a different fire station, you did things a little bit differently. Routines were still different at the time. Some people cleaned on certain days, some people cleaned in the morning, some in the afternoon, so it all depended on where you went to and what the captain was like. But the captain was God at that point. You didn't see your BC a whole lot at that point, but you spent a lot of time with your captain, and the captain there was, I think, an authoritative point to it, which I'm not a big fan of. I don't necessarily believe in that. Instead of an authoritative regime or authoritative work, I believe more in a teamwork approach, that everybody is there to support the firefighter end of the nozzle to put the fire out. And that includes from the fire chief on down. That's what we're there for. So I looked at it a little bit differently. I wasn't a big fan of it. You do what they say. What are you going to do? You're a probationary firefighter. I was a probationary firefighter at 102 at the time. That's where I spent a big portion of my probation with Captain Ty Rebo. Ty was a great guy, enjoyed him thoroughly. But he was a very conservative guy as far as his firefighting, and his firefighting aggressiveness would be the best way to say it. Enjoyed him as a person, but I think there was other ways to fight fire. And then I transferred over to Truck 6 at the time, Truck 106 with Bob Hansen, and I realized there is a different way to fight fire. Definitely. Absolutely. And you made a big difference, and you were definitely drawn to a certain location or a station, and I think that I was extremely lucky to end up, after probation, I ended up at Truck 106 with Bob Hansen as the captain, Jeff Wild as the engineer, and Jeff Metzinger was the other firefighter. And it was a great crew. We did that, of the 10 standard firefighting orders, we did the last one, fight fire aggressively. I know there's more to it, but let's start with that.
Sure.
So, and I learned a lot about how to fight structure fires there. Tremendous amount from Bob. He was an amazing captain. I think that a crew that is bonded together and that is cohesive together, you just handle it. And it doesn't have to be... Bob was a very good captain, but he expected Jeff and I to be firefighters and to know our job. If something changed and Bob was busy, he would send Jeff and I to the roof to go cut the hole, because he knew that we were more than capable of figuring out where that hole needs to go. We don't need a captain to hold our hand. We're firefighters. And I think that's a big portion of where I learned to become, whatever rank it was going to be that rank. Know that your job in that rank, nobody has to tell you how to do your job. Just because you're an engineer or a captain or a battalion chief, they shouldn't be able to have to tell you, hey, make sure you do this. You should know that. That's part of your career. That's part of your job as a firefighter or an engineer, how to drive your apparatus, how to do those things. It's not that you don't communicate, but he expects you to be able to handle that saw without being able to tell, oh, you didn't make the cut across the top quite right. Okay, well, get out of my way and I will. That's the way it worked back then. So it was different. I had quite a few. As a fellow firefighter, the funniest guy I ever worked for was Jeff Metzinger. My closest friend, Brian Rice. We spent a lot of time off duty. Our families became very involved with each other to this day. With our grandchildren, we each have a grandchild that lives in Seattle. Actually, they have 2 grandchildren in Seattle now. They take care of each other's grandchildren, the parents of that. So our children, it's the craziest thing how intertied we've become. That is beyond mentorship. It's a friendship that you have, it's a mutual respect, and you can talk about things. So Brian was definitely a huge mentor. Bob Hansen was. Bob Chase, definitely. Very different than Bob Hansen, but I respected Bob in the sense of the way he ran the reserve program, and I've always had a huge respect for him. Jim McDowell was my battalion chief for a long time at Battalion 7. He was an example of a BC that I would put up against anybody. I've always admired him, his calm demeanor. He knew what you would do, and you knew what he would do, and you better doggone do it and get it done. He had high expectations, but he also took good care of his firefighters. Ooh, some of it is sometimes as a mentor, you don't necessarily have a choice. You just get a connection with somebody. And I think that there are mentors. Everybody should be a mentor, no matter what rank you are. Whether you're a firefighter, engineer, captain, whatever it's going to be, you can mentor other people of the same rank. You can mentor, obviously, probationary firefighters. You can mentor people as you go up. I always enjoyed, I spent some time at Battalion 5, and I always enjoyed meeting the new probationary firefighters. I felt that was my job, to know that there was an open door. Yes, I'm going to tell their captain that they came to me and we chatted, but there was an open door. If they really had a problem and couldn't get something that they needed to be done or felt uncomfortable, that they had that open door to me. But I also felt that there is a chain of command. We need to follow that. And I will tell their captain what's going on, but we need to have that so that there's something wrong at that captain firefighter level. It's really wrong. It can't just stop there. And so I believe that's part of mentoring people, to be able to have that access and that open door. I still have the opportunity every now and then. A young gentleman was dating a good friend of ours that lives just around the corner, and we talked quite a bit after. Every now and then he'd come by and say hi and chat the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. I believe in that. That's something that you do for your whole life. Being a mentor is just talking to somebody about, hey, what do you think? Where are you going? How do you think this should go? And to draw them out. I enjoyed it. I really did. I think it was a fun time and an opportunity to be able to connect to people that you normally wouldn't necessarily. It wasn't so much that I ran this call. I knew these questions ahead of time, and I thought, if you've been a firefighter for a minute, I don't care whether you're a reserve, wherever you fit into this world, you are going to have a bad call. And I can think of 100 of them that are horrible. I think the most challenging thing for me, I was a battalion chief at the time, was when firefighter Jim Saunders passed away. He died on line of duty death. I was at home here. Got the call that he was at Mercy San Juan, got in my vehicle, drove down there. I was the best man for Jim and Holly's wedding, so I knew Jim and Holly very closely. And it was, I was assigned as a chief officer to be at the hospital. That was my job for the next 5 or 6 days. I think we ended up there. And that was extremely difficult. And I thought back, what is so difficult? And it's not that, I know you guys had a recent event with Kyle Rutherford. It's not that it's a coworker, it's that it's a family member. We talk about this so much in the fire service, that we're a family. When I realized, I look back when we lost Jim, I didn't just lose a coworker, I lost a family member. And that's what's different about the fire service, and that's what made that so doggone hard. Anytime a firefighter is injured, anytime one of our family members is hurt, doesn't matter where, it makes an impact on us. And I think that's a huge thing, and that made a huge impact on me pretty late in my career. But yeah, I think that losing a firefighter is definitely the hardest thing. There's so many. Most of them involved Jeff Metzinger, the funniest guy I know, the greatest co-firefighter that I know. However, this one does not. Another guy that some of you may know, his name was wonderful Fred Waddell. And my kids growing up would always go to Thanksgiving family dinners, and they would tell, Dad, you got any Fred stories? So I have many Fred stories, but there's one in particular that I remember. We were I was working on an extra shift out at 109 on the old LTI tiller rig, one of the first tiller rig that American River and Metro had. And we got a call for that stupid call every now and then, cat in a tree. 4 of us on the truck, Fred was tillering. Okay, I don't even remember who was that was the other folks on that tree. I just remember Fred. And so we go to the apartment complex, and there's the lady in the back, and there's probably 10 or 15 folks gathered around. And you look up, and there's this 50, 60-foot redwood tree in this residential house, and there's a cat way up. Well, my cat's up in the tree. Oh, gosh, okay. Well, you know, we're going to drive around. You can hear the cat meowing for a mile. Been up there 3 days. It's drizzly and cold. We'll drive around and see if the homeowner's home. We drive around, knock on the door. Oh, thank God they're not home. Let's go. Just as we get back in the truck, somebody drives in the driveway. Are you here for the cat in the tree? It's been there for 3 days. Oh, no. Okay. Well, let's go into your house and let's go see if you don't mind. We can go in the backyard and take a look. So I go in the backyard, and cold and drizzly, and there's a big puddle of water in the backyard, and I'm looking up, and I'm like, oh, boy, that cat's up there. I said, you know, that cat's going to come down. I've never seen a cat skeleton in a tree. And the one thing I forgot to do is the first thing in the morning is hit Fred over the head with a 2x4. So we get Fred's attention. And I didn't do it that day. So out of the corner of my eye, I see something passing by just at the end of the house and going towards the tree. And I look over, and there's Fred, and Fred's up about 12 feet already. And I go, Fred, what are you doing? And he goes, I got it, Captain. I'm going to get the cat out of the tree. Oh, God. I'm done. My life is over. My career's over. It's done. And I watched the tree, and I'm like, Fred. But you know what? Fred had his helmet on and his gloves. Just a T-shirt, but that's fine in the cold weather for Fred. Helmet on and gloves, which fantastic. If he falls and kills himself, at least he'll have his helmet on. That'll be good. So Fred goes up the tree, and as the redwood tree starts to do this, the cat is not happy. And Fred looks like a bear. And Fred's climbing the tree, and he climbs up farther and farther the tree swaying back and forth. And the cat is going back way, way up high. So Fred gets all the way up there, and by this time there's probably 20 or 30 folks at the fence now, and there's about 5 neighbors that have come into the backyard. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well. You know, power lines going across the yard, the normal, residential area. Fred gets up there, cat looks at him, Fred's just like, oh, I can't do this. And he grabs the cat with his hand, gloved hand, shakes it loose from the tree and throws it. The cat is 40 feet up in the air, if he's an ounce up in the air, arcs over the power lines, thank goodness, and lands just like a cartoon, all 4 legs out, splash right in the middle of the water. Oh, good God. At that point, the little Chihuahua dog comes running out of the house, chases the cat, and sure enough goes up the elm tree in the back of the yard. So I'm like, oh my gosh, the elm tree's got about 3 feet of water around it. So I'm thinking, I better go do something. So I start climbing down the fence, trying to stay out of the water. I got it, Cap. And there comes Fred. Whoosh, 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 right through the water. Fred climbs up that big old elm tree limb, and as he arches out over the top of the fence, the lady who owns the cat goes, oh, God, he's not going to throw it again, is he? So I'm like, Fred, be careful. So Fred goes out there. Now the limbs are about this big, and that cat is just rocking away. Well, Fred grabs that cat, goes, hey, lady, because the lady's got a nice big towel because the cat's all wet, whips her over the fence, throws her, whips her over the fence, and does a perfect catch into this set of blankets that this lady has. And this lady looked at me with disdain and said, well, I guess I should thank you. So there you go. That's a Fred story. Now you all have one. But I will tell you that there is nobody I'd rather have at a fire than Fred. As a firefighter or a captain or an engineer, he's the type of individual, I'm a fairly big guy, he's the type of individual that is thick, and that literally could pick up 2 of me, 1 in each hand, and drag us both out of the fire. Yeah. He's one of those guys that I loved and adored working with, because if you hit him over the head with a 2x4 in the morning, you knew exactly how they would respond the rest of the day. It was fantastic. It's no problem at all.
It's the reset button, huh?
Absolutely. Family. There's no doubt in my mind. It's about that bond that is unending. I've made some very close friends since I retired, one in particular, but I hadn't seen probably 6 or 8 years, not too long ago. Actually, you were there, had an opportunity to see some folks, and it was like seeing a family that you hadn't seen in 8 or 10 years. And there's a bond between firefighters that you know what they've been through, and they know what you've been through, and they know what kind of person you are. To be a firefighter is an unusual person. It's even different than a law enforcement. Or I think the closest that we are is a nurse, because of the team efforts that we do. But it's a family, and that is a core part. It's been that way forever. It will be that way forever because of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Somebody that is in a normal lifestyle may see that once in their lifetime, and we see it multiple times during the day. I had an opportunity later in life, had a company car, and there was a number of times that we were coverage or something, and my wife would be with me, and we'd go to something fairly big, and it was just overwhelming to her because she hadn't seen that type of stuff, and that was an abnormal thing in our life where it was like, well, yeah, it's just a 2-alarm fire. What's the big deal? It's not that big a deal. And to us, it's a normal thing, and that draws us together, similar to the military does. You're in battle. You're in battle for other people's lives, and at times you're in battle for your own lives. And I don't see that ever changing. And if it ever does, that will be tragic, in my opinion. Obviously, I think the biggest changes are technology for us. When you talk about old radios, when I started in '76, radios were rough back then. I mean, it was rough. Fire engines were rough. Actually, I started at American River. We still had apparatus that we'd ride on the tailboard. That wasn't uncommon to have a reserve apparatus. Absolutely. Some of the first out apparatus had tailboard riding. So when you put the technology of air conditioning, that was huge. I remember riding on an old 90-foot aerial Firebird, and boy, if you didn't have your turnout coat on, that diamond plate from the engine was just nice and toasty. They didn't have any covers on it. So when you talk about that, that's huge. Radio systems, SCBAs, thermal imaging cameras. We started with MDTs, which was just terminals. Now they're MDCs, and they're actually computers. All of that is a huge change. Vehicles, clothing, huge difference in clothing nowadays than what it used to be. But it's so funny because I always think of this. Somewhere down the way, we're going to invent something besides water to put out a fire. Because ultimately, from how many hundreds of years ago till now, all that technology has still got to get water from the ground, through the engine, and out the nozzle to put the water on the fire, period. Mm-hmm. That's what it's got to happen. There's no other way that I know. I mean, okay, there's some dry chems out there for the smaller ones, but the bigger ones, that's still how we do it, which is just seems mind-boggling to me that that's where we're at. But the technology is the biggest thing. I think for me, the transition from being a company officer to a chief officer was the biggest change. And I know that I learned more than anything else from my mistakes. We can all talk about our successes, about how that fire was awesome and we got in there and did it. But when you screw up and do something and you go, ooh, you learn more from that by far. And I think it's important that you stretch yourself. We have a tendency to think that, oh, we're a firefighter, so naturally we can just promote up and then we can run a battalion or run a fire district because, we're it's a fire department. What's the big deal? And I think that there's so much more. Chief Martinez was an amazing fire chief in that regard. He thought 4, 5, 6 steps geographically, politically, in the future what it's going to be, to look down the road and see what's going to happen. And I think that's a unique thing, to be able to learn that, to be able to make those mistakes and to be able to learn under those circumstances is an amazing thing. I kind of wandered off there. I wish I knew that there was more to the fire service than just putting red stuff out, more than just putting water on the fire. I think that is an opportunity for firefighters, engineers, captains, absolutely a need for battalion chiefs, that you understand that there's more to this fire district than just going on calls. There's more to be able to get this fire department from point A to point B, whether it's working with local governments about taxations or developments, or what's the long-term plan for our districts? What does that look like? And how do you get that done with outside agencies? And I'm not talking about other fire departments. I'm talking about local governments, state governments, and at times federal governments. How do you get extra funding? How do you find those ways to keep those firefighters there? That is a huge important part that I think that sometimes we miss when we first walk in the door. And it's a hard concept to sometimes take people out of that firehouse and say, look, it's absolutely, is this what we do? Yes, there's no doubt about it. But sometimes to get that done, you've got to look bigger and take a step back. And if you can understand that at a firefighter's level and start inputting that and start helping that, whatever way you can do it, learning different things, involving yourself in different communities, that's a huge thing. I think that's the biggest thing. Finding something different than just, not that it's not important, don't take that wrong, but it's important that we have funding. It's important that we can put those apparatus on the road, that we can pay for the fuel and for the personnel and for the tires, whatever it's going to be. There's such a big picture out there. One of the things that I got a chance to be involved in was when McClellan transferred from military service to private service. I was a captain at the time. I took an administrative assignment, helped out a little bit with that, got a great opportunity to see a whole different thing. Was in a table with negotiating between the Coast Guard, the County of Sacramento, and the fire department on how we were going to transition the local Air Force Base fire authority into Metro Fire, American River Fire at the time. Dang it. But that was a huge thing to be able to be part of that and to understand there's so much more. When we were able to get McClellan as part of our fire agency, look at the things that we became involved in, look at the opportunities that have been there, the relationships that we have with the Coast Guard, that you just go, how do we be involved in a federal level at that point? It's just, there's so many other things out there, and not that the best part of the job isn't fighting fire, because I still miss that, but there is so much more to it. Man, take a look at your failures. Don't be afraid to fail. Try something different. We have an agency which is, there's not many like us out there. When you talk about a hazmat program, second to none, a rescue program, unbelievable, helicopter program, hazmat program, dozer program, wildland program that we do, the type 3s that we staff, water rescues that we do. There's not many folks that have all of these things besides the normal everyday fire department. And find something that you can do, even if you don't know anything about it, and be a part of it. It's a lesson that you will never regret. I started out with helping fix SCBAs, and I loved it, and I learned so much about that. And it's important. Find someplace where you can fit in, whatever it's going to be. Volunteer on a committee. I assume you still have the apparatus committee or the turnout committee, whatever it's going to be. Find some place to be involved in and understand what there is. Are there times when you're going to misstep in those situations? Absolutely. But that's what's going to help you become a better firefighter. It's important to be able to have that outside experience, have something other than just knowing what your firehouse is all about. You know what? Everybody's so different. My wife and I were extremely lucky to be able to not work afterwards. I've struggled with some orthopedic issues, new hip, new knee, that type of stuff. And I think that not being able to work has been a blessing for me. When Susan and I first retired, we left in late January, and we were gone till May. We decided that we were either going to kill each other, and she was going to come back in her own vehicle, or we were going to make it. So we drove all the way to Florida, hung out, wandered around, and for the first 3 weeks, the longest that we were apart was 3 hours that she went and got her hair done. For myself and my wife, it was a whole change in marriage, having me there every single day. But we worked through those issues, and it became fantastic. And we have enjoyed it thoroughly together. Beyond blessed to be able to do that. I don't know how to tell you retirement. Everybody says, oh, you think you're relaxed. Give it a year and then tell me about how relaxed you are. You don't realize that situational awareness, that you're always up and you're always on. And it takes a year. I don't think I ever get rid of it, but I think it's lessened. And I think having a quiet place to be able to do that is a great opportunity to do that. We spent a ton of time with our family. We focused on that, been able to do that. We have one son and daughter-in-law who are here locally, and with our 4-month-old granddaughter. And then our other son and his wife are in Seattle, but they're looking to move down with our little over a year-old grandson. So being able to focus on family has been huge, to be able to do that and spend a lot of time with them. You miss a lot of that time when you're working, from school events to, it's always the joke that my wife always had is that, yes, I'm married, he's just at work. So we all can relate to that, whatever our spouse or significant other is. oftentimes we're not near them at the times that need to be. And this gave an opportunity to be able to do that. So that's what I focused on, is that my wife gave up a lot of things for us to be able to be successful. And so now it was my turn to make sure that she was successful and that she got some of that time back.
So for all of us, as we go through our careers, make sure we keep that balance in mind.
It's huge. I wasn't good at it. I sucked. I loved that job. It was the best job ever. I'd never, ever want to do anything else in my life. I mean, I did it. I started in '76. I was 16 years old, and I did it my entire life. That was part of me. It still is. And I think that you can take a step back from it, but it never leaves you. You never leave some of that situational awareness. You never leave the things that you learn. I still wake up at night in a half a fraction of a second. I'm wide awake and ready to go. And, you know, it's just one of those things that you'll always have. So,
Yeah. Well, we truly are blessed to have you in our fire district. And I'm very, very thankful to you both for all the time that I got to work with you. And thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today on Capture the Knowledge. Dale Turner. I still have a hard time not calling you Chief, but you keep telling me to call you Dale.
There you go. I appreciate that.
I'm working on it. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.